Many Americans find themselves at an unprecedented moment. We feel isolated, our world is marked by divisions, and we're not sure how to engage neighbors across differences.
We know our communities thrive when they are places of belonging for all. It's time to rebuild the we, a bigger sense of we than what we see around us today.
That's why we created Reimagining Us. I'm Nicole Argo, the founder and executive director at the Together Up Institute.
And I'm Scott Hutchison, the executive director of E Pluribus Unum. On Reimagining Us, we'll be talking to behavioral scientists, change makers, and educators to understand why we're divided, to hear true stories of people bridging divides and finding common ground.
Reimagining Us is available on Apple Podcasts, Spotify, YouTube, and wherever you get your podcasts. Learn more at nextchapterpodcast.com/reimaginingus and togetherup.org/reimaginingus.
From the studios of the Optimism Institute, welcome to the Blue Sky Podcast. I'm your host, Bill Burke, and in every Blue Sky episode, we'll be speaking to leaders, researchers, and thinkers whose stories and insights will remind us that there is always blue sky above. Sometimes you just have to get your head above the clouds to see it. Past Blue Sky episodes have touched on different facets of education, from John Wood's Room to Read and Hugo, to Deco and Jonathan Conyers and the Power of Debate, to the Strausses and Spirit series, and most recently, Sal Khan and the future of AI in the classroom. Today's guest is also an educator, and her passion is promoting the value of arts education opportunities for young people. Erica Rosenfeld Halverson is a professor, an author, and an actor. She's currently professor of curriculum and instruction at the University of Wisconsin-Madison, where she studies arts education and teaches the next generation of teaching artists and classroom instructors. Her book, How the Arts Can Save Education, Transforming Teaching, Learning, and Instruction, shows how we can fix our broken system of schooling by reimagining teaching and learning using the arts. She's also the host of the podcast Arts Educators Save the World, which you'll learn more about soon. I hope you enjoy this Blue Sky conversation with Erica Halverson as much as I did. Erica Halverson, welcome to the Blue Sky Podcast.
Thank you, Bill. Thanks so much for having me today.
It's a delight. I really enjoyed doing the research for this and I've been looking forward to speaking with you. Let's start at the very beginning.
A very good place to start.
I knew you were a musical. You were born and raised in New York, and then you went to Northwestern to study acting. And I know that Northwestern is one of the great acting schools. But sometime when you were there, you decided you didn't necessarily want to be an actor yourself, but you wanted to teach acting in the arts. Can you walk us through that transformation and what motivated that?
Absolutely. I will say that my performance and theater education at Northwestern was top-notch. And so I have zero complaints about the academic part of my training. However, when I got to be a senior, there was a noticeable shift between what I've come to call the craft and the career. So, learning to have a life in the theater has a very expansive set of ideas and tools and tasks, and it's playful and it's risky, and you can play Hecuba, and rip your shirt off and eat a watermelon on stage, which is something I did in an acting class.
Nice.
And then, the transition to the career happens, and all of a sudden you live in the body that you live in, and you have you make the contributions that you can make. And I saw for myself, at least as a young person, a life of playing, wacky next door neighbors, little sisters, and at least in college, little old Jewish ladies. And I honestly just wasn't super excited by that, and realizing that the career not always. And I have many friends who've persisted and now have a performance career that's hugely varied and rich.
Sure.
But that sort of young person's performance career just felt very constrained to me. And so I decided that what I loved was the craft, and was not super excited by the career. And so kind of wandered off into the world of how can I make the craft a core part of what I do as my life's work, without, frankly, much about what that would mean, other than that also as an undergraduate at Northwestern, I had been part of an organization that I did not start, but that I ran, called Griffin's Tale, which still exists, which is a performing ensemble that takes writing submitted by area kids and creates performances of them. And some friends of mine and I were really inspired by that and just loved that work deeply, but wanted to extend it beyond getting work from kids who already clearly had opportunities to craft their creative selves, and ask the question of like, could we teach that? Could we be the communicators of creative expression? And could we translate that for young people who maybe didn't have as many of those opportunities? And so we started a program in Chicago that at the time was called Barrel of Monkeys, still exists, is now called Playmakers Lab, which is an artist in residence program in elementary schools teaching creative expression through the tools of writing and improvisation and performance. And we were, 21-year-old idiots with college degrees. So, for what that's worth, but really very uninitiated into running a nonprofit, thinking about curriculum. We just sort of, and this feels very late 90s. We were like, I don't know, like, how about this? Right. Like some things that we've done, that we did that you would never do now, like put kids in a van and drive them somewhere.
Yeah.
Without like permission forms or insurance or, parents. And pretty quickly I became really passionate about and fascinated by learning as an intellectual idea and how learning functioned in these creative processes. And so ended up back at Northwestern in a PhD program in what's called the learning sciences to study the relationship between art making and learning. And that has become my passion and my career over the past 20 years.
Fascinating. And you described yourself as being 21 and clueless, but you made a pretty mature decision and distinction there between the performing yourself and teaching performance. That world often reminds me of sports too, where, you grow up as a kid, you see all these successful athletes, and by definition, the ones you see are the successful ones. You're like, I want to be a hockey player. And so I had that dream for a while, and then I realized that wasn't for me, but I could stay around the sport. I could coach, I could do other things. And the business of performing is equally competitive, if not more so. And again, you see the Oscar winners and the people on Broadway stages, but there's so many people gutting it out in these auditions and humiliations, and it's just brutal. So it's great to see that you had that mature decision at a young age, and you clearly have had a very fun and fulfilling career since then.
I have. And I think one of the reasons that decision perhaps was, well, I don't know, maybe it was not better informed, but I was not the kind of person who particularly cared about becoming famous. And there's nothing wrong with that kind of ambition. It just wasn't my ambition. And but I did and do love performing, and I love the craft of theater making. What I was really unexcited by was how I was going to be put into roles and put into places that had nothing to do with how I might experiment, what I might learn, right? And that's not what casting is. And so I wasn't mad about it so much as I was like, oh, I see. Just a very quick story. When I was an undergraduate, I was in school with a lot of folks who've become quite successful. And my junior year of college, I was in a production of Pippin starring Heather Headley as the leading player and Kate Baldwin as Catherine, directed by Jim Weitzer, who was in Phantom of the Opera for many, many years. I think he's retired from performing now, but these are all once and future Broadway stars. And I played the grandmother, Bertha, the old lady. And, it was, I think I didn't feel intimidated. I mean, obviously you perform with Heather Headley at 20 years old and you're like, oh, that's a different kind of a human being. But it was more that I was like, oh, this is my fate. Like, right? Like, hope you like, the, whatever you call, not the 11 o'clock number, whatever the wacky comedy, like, hope you like the wacky comedy number. 'Cause this is what you're going to be doing for the next 20 years. And I was like, I know how to do this. And I don't know that doing the thing that I know how to do is what I want my 20s and 30s to be about.
Many times when a young person realizes that the career they hoped for isn't going to work out, they switch to something completely different. I, for example, learned that my childhood dream of being a center for the Detroit Red Wings wasn't in the cards, and I wound up in the media business. Erica, on the other hand, when she decided she didn't want to be an actor, was able to take what she described as a more expansive view of life in the theater, which has allowed her to stay in the field she loves and in a role that's better suited for her skills and passions. And had she decided to become a full-time performer, she might not have had the chance to pursue her interest in helping less advantaged kids tell their stories by creating Playmakers Lab. Getting back to our conversation, we'll hear more about Erica's interest in pushing for getting more arts education back in our schools. One of the things you've become very passionate about is the importance and the value of arts education in schools. I'd like to start with, why is it that the arts seem to be the first thing to go when schools cut back? It feels like it's been, when I was growing up, I believe it was just accepted as part of the curriculum. It would have been odd if we hadn't had art class and music class, I think. Why has that changed, and what are you trying to do about it?
I mean, and to be fair to our humanities colleagues, and even to some degree to our science colleagues, we have now moved into such a reductionist phase of particularly elementary schooling, where really the only things that are left are reading and math.
Really?
And many of the non-reading and math courses can tend to be structured in terms of what these other subjects and ideas can do for us in terms of reading and math.
Right.
I think there's a few reasons. I think we have let the assessment tail wag the learning dog.
Yes.
Which began really with a liberal-minded, leave no child behind set of policies, which were designed to ensure that public schooling was serving all kids equally.
Yep.
And rather than focus on what are the learning goals and what are kids doing, which is much harder, the focus became on the measures of equity, which are reduced almost entirely to performance scores on reading and math tests.
Yep.
And so the more you focus on those outcomes, you can understand how that back maps into, well, if we want kids to do better on this math test, we better do more of the math that shows up on the math test.
Sure.
And that is coupled with a persistent, what we would call deficit-oriented approach to learning, which is a focus on what kids lack rather than starting with what kids bring. And so if kids are quote unquote bad at reading, we think our job is to do more reading rather than to say, what are kids bringing into our learning spaces and how can we leverage those assets to create new experiences for kids that both lift up and enhance what they bring and allow them to develop and bring in new ways of thinking and doing. And the arts of all of those disciplines are the most difficult to re-inscribe as kind of like, here's the test, here's the outcomes, are you doing a good job, right? And social studies being sort of the next most difficult, which is where that goes in the hierarchy. And science at the elementary school level being also sort of difficult to measure in that way.
Yeah, it's really interesting because our kids, my kids are 30 and 28 now, so they were in classrooms when a lot of this was starting. The reliance on testing or the emphasis on testing results, teach for the test kind of mentality. I'm laughing because I remember our daughter, she'll be embarrassed if she listens. She got a terrible score on one of these tests, like terrible, to the point where they flagged it for us. We're like, Erin, what was going on when you took that test? She said, I was looking out the window and thinking about horses. She was like 7, and we were kind of like, good for you.
That's my favorite answer, actually, that I've ever heard to something like that. Like, because not only she knew what she was thinking about.
Yeah.
Like she had like a whole world of processing happening. Like imaginative space.
Exactly. And I wonder when I hear you talk about this too, and maybe this was in part of your answer, that the arts can be used as not just as a good in and of themselves, but actually as a way to learn some of these other things. So now dating myself, I grew up with Schoolhouse Rock on TV.
Oh, yeah.
I know the preamble to the Constitution because I learned it singing a song or having a song sung to me on Schoolhouse Rock. And I'll spare you the singing of it, but I could do it right now, all these years later. So it seems to me there's an opportunity to bridge those two also and use the arts to enhance other forms of learning. Is that fair?
It is fair. And within arts education, there's a pretty intense debate about what we would call kind of the instrumental function of the arts, which is what you're describing, right?
Yep.
How art making can make you better at other things that we care about, and the kind of intrinsic value, right? Arts for art's sake. And my view is yes, all of those things. Right? That like what for me, I wrote a book. It's called How the Arts Can Save Education. And it's about how art making as a set of processes and practices should change the way we do teaching and the way we understand learning, both in the kind of instrumentalized way that you're describing, which is how arts practices can be incorporated into standardized subjects, but also in a deeper understanding of what learning to make a piece of art can do for us. So how learning to use a set of tools to represent an idea is the core of all learning. Like that's what doing math is, right? It's understanding how numbers and equations and systems and graphs, how those allow you to represent ideas that you can't represent using words, right? And that's what it means to write a piece of music or edit a video or, any number of, or make a pot that you can put flowers in, right?
Yeah.
And so for me, I am constantly advocating for an understanding of what a deep and meaningful art making process does for learners in order to make them more able to achieve and perform in the other academic spaces that we culturally have decided are important, like decoding text, which is, I'm not saying decoding text isn't important. I'm just saying if that's the only thing we care about, there are ways that being a good artist can help you be a better decoder of text.
Fascinating. And presumably, too, we're trying to educate whole human beings, right? And so
I hope so.
The whole human experience includes the arts and an appreciation of them, ability to participate in that world.
And to bring yourself into a learning space. So many kids feel unwelcome in the institutions that are theoretically designed to help lift them up. And art making is a really productive pathway for inclusion, identity, seeing oneself in a learning space, feeling welcomed, feeling willing to take a risk on a new set of ideas that maybe you wouldn't ordinarily because you feel that yourself and your ideas are included. So, absolutely, there's this kind of social psychological function that art making serves for kids who feel like school and other kinds of learning institutions aren't for them.
As with a lot of legislation, it's probably fair to say about No Child Left Behind that these measures were well-intended and probably did cause some very good outcomes. At the same time, though, a focus on meeting test scores in a narrow range of subjects has had the unintended effect of crowding out other classroom opportunities. Listening to Erica and thinking back to my own education, I have to agree that it would be a good thing if we could try to balance the curriculum for our kids at least a bit more with different disciplines, including the arts. It seems to me, too, one of the cool things about art in school is that, in math class, there's a right answer and a wrong answer, right? 2 times 3 is 6, period. If you say 7, you are wrong. Versus in art class, let's draw a picture of this picture, or draw a picture of a horse, or draw any picture you want. It's a more open-ended, it's a more free expression, it's a different way of quote unquote evaluating the students, encouraging them. I would think too, just for, again, the whole person, but sort of your whole brain and your whole form of education, it's a really important and different part of a curriculum that shouldn't be missed.
Completely. And what you're describing lends itself well to developing not only other ways for teachers to evaluate kids, but for us to become better evaluators of ourselves and one another, right? One of the things that art making is really good for is teaching people critique. And I don't mean criticizing, right? I mean real, how do you look at something that someone has made and talk about it so that you can express what sense you're making of it, and so that the artist can hear what audience members are taking from the thing that they've made to determine whether they've been successful or not, right? A horse drawing is a great example. You draw a horse, you put it in a critique practice, and a kid says, this reminds me of a cow.
Yeah.
Right? Yeah. That there's some features of this that maybe you want to continue to tweak and work on so that it reminds more people of a horse. Or maybe you go oh, sweet, horse cow.
Right, exactly.
I'm going to lean into that, and now I'm going to make the world's first horse cow, right? So there's a lot to be gained from using the artifacts that we make through art as opportunities for dialogue with educators, with more expert others, and with one another.
So how do you approach, as you're teaching, if I have it right, in the Wisconsin School of Education, and so you have, among other things, mostly, I assume, aspiring teachers, classroom teachers, as well as administrators and that sort of thing. How do you handle this if there isn't a lot of arts education in schools? Are you training educators to be arts educators, or do you compound the issue by not teaching it because there aren't jobs? Well, help us with that.
That's such a fabulous question, I think. And one, yeah, that's a fabulous question. So a few things. First of all, over the 18 years that I have been a faculty member, we have moved from requiring an arts integration class for students who are in an early childhood program. So that's where, so I teach a class called Arts Integration for Teaching and Learning. Okay. And it began as a requirement that all students who were training to be, say, 4K through third grade teachers had to take, to now an elective that anyone in the elementary education program, that is 4K through ninth grade, can take. And the reasons for those are political. The licenses have changed. So anybody who wants to be an elementary school teacher in Wisconsin has to get a certification K through 9. There's all sorts of unrelated to actual teaching practice reasons. Yes. But so it is now an elective. And I have developed a program for artists and activists who want to have teaching in their lives, who want to become teaching artists, but maybe don't want to be classroom teachers. And so now that teaching space has both of those students in it. So in any given year, I'll have, say, 15 people who want to be elementary school teachers and 15 artists who know they want to work somehow in education. And my classroom learning environment is both about giving those individual folks tools and ideas that they need to be successful, but also pretty actively encouraging them to build relationships with one another so that their future practice involves collaboration. Because the way for this kind of practice, I believe, to be successful in formal settings is to have the classroom teacher, the music teacher, a teaching artist from the community who may be a parent who happens to be, an Afro-Brazilian dance expert because that's where they came from, right? Right. Have them work together to build experiences that kids can have during their time at school. And I do often get that question from the group of 20-year-olds, 19, 20-year-olds in my class who are like, but what do I do if my principal says you can't do this? And my answers, which may be unsatisfying, are range from everything from don't take a job at a school where a principal starts the discussion with, you will have no opportunities to do the things you care about in your classroom. Don't take that job. Right. Or if you find yourself in that situation, identify the spaces during your school day when those opportunities will present themselves. So, every Wisconsin elementary school has what we call a library media specialist. And those folks are often artists, right? Who are they're media makers. So is there a filmmaking project you can do in collaboration with your library media specialist? Or, is there an opportunity for, open community time? And can you bring those community members in to help support an inquiry that maybe you don't feel expert in supporting, but you know enough to know that you need, an artist to partner with you? Or, our community and many communities across the country have partnerships with for-profit arts organizations. I don't know if you've ever heard of Disney Musicals in Schools.
No.
It is a Disney-run program where they license their junior musicals at a reasonable rate to school districts in order for those schools to be able to put that musical on at their school. And there's some kind of teaching artist program that accompanies it. And eventually the classroom teachers take it over themselves. And, we can all say what we want about whether being in, Moana Junior is a transformative art making experience, but it is an opportunity to get kids up on stage, to work with them, to see them differently. And, their classroom teachers who have an interest in that can make that a part of their, teaching and learning life.
When you mention this too, it makes me think, again, when I was a kid, and certainly even my own kids, it was different than today, where you're coming into a school environment as a young person, and that school is competing with a constant barrage of arts and entertainment in that child's face, right? With screens. So you've got to sort of break that spell with a math lesson. That's really hard, I would think. And so the more you could at least incorporate art where they could put down the screen, but also experience art, create their own. Gee, how do you make a video like the one you just saw on TikTok? I don't know. But the competition is that much more fierce for these kids' attention and interest, I would think, than it was even in my own kids' upbringing.
Yeah, I think that's true in the sense that, many kids have access to the screen in more parts of their day than we did as kids, right?
Yeah.
Like you had to wait till Saturday morning, right, to be able to be in what we used to call in my house vidiot mode, right?
Yes.
Like staring at the.
Oh yeah.
And certainly there's a greater diversity of ways for kids to access. I also think, though, that means there's also a lot better quality. There's a lot of crappy stuff.
Oh yeah.
But there's also a lot of really interesting art. And so, part of, I think, what an institution like a school or an after-school program or whatever can do is bring in work that does seem to inspire and motivate creative work and make that part of what you do rather than, push it out altogether, right?
Yeah.
And make kids critics, right?
Yeah.
And curators of their entertainment life.
Yeah.
Rather than kind of letting things wash over without much attention to what's happening in this?
You get a good sense for Erica's creativity when she talks about working art into schools in unexpected ways, especially with the example of the library media specialist. And with school time and budgets tight, partnering with for-profit entities like Disney can also make good sense. And thinking back to Schoolhouse Rock and Saturday morning cartoons has made me nostalgic for the good old days. I'll spare you my singing of the preamble to the U.S. Constitution, but I promise you I could do it. Not to mention conjunction junction or lolly lolly lolly, get your adverbs here. At least half of this audience probably has no idea what I'm talking about. So let's get back to Erica and learn more about her amazing podcast. So let's shift gears to your podcast, because it seems to me you've come up with one of the great devices on this podcast, I think, where arts educators save the world. And what you've done is your guests are not, you have more than one guest. You have the artists themselves, and then you pair them with an influential educator or mentor that they've had in their lives, which A, I just think is a beautiful concept. B, it so reinforces these things that you care about, that the arts are important and that teaching the arts are important. And you have a very envy-driving list of guests that you've had, including Lin-Manuel Miranda, Jonathan Groff, Robert Lopez, whose name I didn't know, but he was co-creator of Book of Mormon, co-wrote some of the songs in Frozen, Josh Radnor from How I Met Your Mother. Amazing group of people, which I think is a testament not just to you as a host, but also they have a desire to help you out with this because it's important. So that's a long way of saying, could you tell us some more about Arts Educators Save the World?
Yes. And I so appreciate, Bill. Like, first of all, I love having these conversations as conversations. And I am really inspired to get more folks who care about the arts, even if it is, as a consumer, a Lin-Manuel Miranda super fan, to participate in these dialogues about how education in all of its forms and mentorship in all of its forms really transforms people's lives, both the artists, many of whom, as you said, are household names, some of whom are not, but who are extremely successful in their venue. Some of the greatest living American ceramicists and glass artists, and, TV showrunners, and how their lives have been transformed. And a lot of the mentors end up talking about how their lives have been transformed as a result of serving in that role. And one of the most exciting parts of doing the podcast is that we sort of started with what you imagine this idea would be, which is like a really successful, famous artist like a Lin-Manuel Miranda and his elementary school music teacher, who happens to also have been my elementary school music teacher, which is crazy. How we sort of came to this idea, and Robert Lopez's, which is kind of how we came to this idea, right? That's sort of what you would imagine these conversations would be. Oh, when we were 8, 9, and 10 years old, Barbara Ames gave us the opportunity. Robert Lopez, Bobby, wrote the song that we sang as 6th graders when we graduated from elementary school. That's right. Crazy. And that was made possible because Barbara Ames, not only saw Bobby's potential, but understood that venue of music education was the place to encourage him and to give him the opportunity to take those risks and to write a song that 56th graders, sang for hundreds and hundreds of people. So those conversations, and Jonathan Groff similarly brought his elementary school music teacher.
Amazing.
And similarly, those conversations are what you might imagine. And we have purposefully expanded what we mean by education and mentorship to include higher education. So we've had, the TV writer, Rachel Axler, who's an Emmy Award-winning television writer, brought her college professor, her creative writing professor from college, right? So those kinds of relationships, but then also folks who met as adults, and for whom education and mentorship looks more like a mutual exchange of ideas. We have an upcoming episode with the head of documentary filmmaking for Time Studios. His name is Lauren Hammonds, and he brought his mentor, who is filmmaker Warrington Hudlin, who, again, is maybe a name that you don't know, but he started the Black Filmmakers of America. That little thing. And has been a lifelong producer of all sorts of films, both fiction and nonfiction. And Lauren is one of the pioneers of VR and immersive film. And so Warrington spoke a lot about how Lauren made Warrington's 70-something-year-old career possible through his kind of innovative practice. But of course, Lauren has said, I wouldn't be anywhere if Warrington wouldn't have let me into these rooms, where the most productive filmmakers of color, like the room where it happens, right? The most productive filmmakers of color were having discussions about the future of filmmaking. And Warrington brought Lauren into those rooms. But then likewise, Warrington said, Lauren changed my life by introducing me to this kind of world of immersive film. So being expansive in how we understand what education and mentorship looks like. And being purposeful in all of the diversity of conversations that we have. So gender diversity and sort of racial and ethnic diversity, but art form diversity, mentor diversity, where the mentorship has taken place. If listeners don't know who Bill Strickland is, they should. He is a MacArthur Genius Grant winner, ceramicist, founder of an international group of youth arts organizations / workplace development centers, the founding center of which is in Pittsburgh. And we had him on with a ceramicist, Sharif Bey, who is a world famous ceramicist. And Sharif learned to throw pots in Bill's studio in the youth program in Pittsburgh, right? Yeah. And that's not a school setting, but it is an equally transformative set of experiences that had changed both of their lives and the lives of hundreds and probably thousands of, young people for whom school has not been a particularly productive place to learn.
Well, like I said, I just think it's a great idea for the podcast for so many reasons. One is these incredible conversations, these amazing reflections, but also, and you're educating educators, being a teacher is a tough job for a number of reasons. And I've always thought one of the toughest would be you have these kids for a year, maybe a couple years, and they're gone and they move on and they do their thing. And more often than not, you never hear from them again. And you might wonder how they're doing or you don't even have time to wonder because you got the next group coming in. But this idea of having people pause and think about who that person was and then sit down and talk to them. I had the privilege of co-authoring a book and it was featured in a publication. And out of the blue, I got a letter from Mrs. Goldfarb, my 4th grade teacher. It went the other way. She reached out to me. And I went by Billy in 4th grade. She said, I wondered if that was the same Billy Burke. And then I saw the picture and I knew it was. She was like my favorite teacher in grade school. I hadn't reached out to her, but we had this great back and forth. And I just thought, gosh, there's so many teachers who had an impact on people like she did on me. And they never hear from them again. So I just think it's a beautiful way to make that happen.
Thanks. Yeah, it is. I have the great privilege of witnessing those interactions, and there's a fair number of tears, more than I would have anticipated. And especially the moment that is often not captured in the podcast is the moment when we join the virtual room. And these folks see each other for the first time. And often it's the first time in a while. And those moments, I feel very lucky to witness those moments between two people who've had a deep impact on one another, but are probably not in one another's lives on a daily basis.
Right. And you're making them all happy, and you're encouraging current teachers and aspiring teachers and aspiring artists to really, everybody, I think Jonathan Groff was born with an immense amount of talent. Like, I mentioned hockey before. I could have practiced every day. I wasn't playing in the NHL. I didn't have those gifts. But even those with the greatest gifts, Jonathan Groff, needed that teacher. They needed that help. And I think it's really helpful, too, for people who have wound up being, quote unquote, successful in whatever they do, to realize that, they worked hard and they had the gifts, but somebody somewhere, if not many people, helped them along the way. And I would think you, as an educator of educators, that's a really important lesson.
It is, absolutely. And I think, to be honest, most teachers, most educators kind of toil in anonymity, right? And so to both hear the voices of folks like them, and to hear them get the chance to be recognized is really special. And also it reminds many educators why they do what they do.
I really do think Erica has a brilliant formula here, with artists coming on her show with people they've identified as teachers or mentors. None of us gets where we get on our own, and too often we neglect to recognize or thank those who've helped us along the way. Arts Educators Save the World is a great way to demonstrate the gratitude that even the superstars that Erica has interviewed have for the teachers in their lives. Now, back to the final segment of my Blue Sky conversation with Erica Halverson.
I have a vision, a longer-term vision for the podcast of talking with folks who are very successful in other aspects of their lives, but who claim arts education as one of the ways that has kind of shaped them. I mean, my dream guest is Justice Ketanji Brown Jackson, right? Known theater kid.
She just did a cameo, didn't she?
She did. She was in Anne Juliet on Broadway, right? Like, that is a person who I would love to have, to talk with. And if her high school theater teacher is still living, about how those experiences prepared Justice Jackson for the incredibly arduous, gauntlet that she ran from college to where she is. And I suspect there are lots of very successful people who have that same journey.
Have you ever seen Condoleezza Rice play the piano?
I haven't, but that does not surprise me.
Yeah. There's another, she was a, I think, legit sort of performance concert pianist who winds up being Secretary of State. It's that's a great idea. And frankly, that'll open up your pool of guests widely, because there's a lot of people out there who would fit that bill. So Erica, as we approach the end of our conversation, sadly, talk to me about, you've been at this a while, and it's tough work that you're doing because you're fighting against some of these forces of standardized testing and that sort of thing. But at the same time, I imagine this podcast is incredibly fulfilling and makes you more optimistic about the impact that teachers can have. How do you feel about the future of arts education and how you see the rest of your career as you do this important work?
The second part of the question touches on the sort of personal midlife crisis of like, what do I want to do with the second half of my life? We probably won't get into that. But, because of what we've discussed around how the arts have been for so long marginalized from kind of schooling and policy and mainstream, we're very good at working around it. And I have become fond of saying to my colleagues in, science education, for example, welcome to the resistance. We have a lot of strategies for you. I am very comfortable not only working on the margins, but making the margins attractive, right? I think that having opportunities, whether they're, artists in residence programs in the schools or the very rich tapestry of out of school time and informal arts experiences that exist that, kind of grounded themselves in big cities, but have spread, around the US. I am very hopeful about those organizations and artists and experiences offering opportunities for young people to have these experiences. And frankly, we have the good stuff. We have the stuff that people want. And so that always finds a way, I think, right? That art making is not only such an appealing way to spend your time, it's such a natural way to spend your time that I think sort of my husband always says, why do people, you have to pay tax attorneys a lot of money to do their job because literally why else would you do it? Right? We have the opposite, right? What we do is life affirming and joy bringing and transformational. And so we get the benefit of that. And I'm also really this is a little nerdy, but I'm very inspired by, will have trained a crop of graduate students who will have PhDs in education, who are expert in and think about the role of art making in teaching and learning, which is the next generation of people who are going to be preparing teachers. So I feel good about that. In terms of my own career, that's maybe another podcast episode. I will say one project I'm working on is in collaboration with PBS here in Wisconsin. We are working on trying to transform the Artist in Residence program that I run here, which is called Whoop and Soccer, which is similar to the programs that I described in Chicago, to transform Whoop and Soccer into a series of digital assets that classroom teachers and out-of-school time educators can use themselves. So as a way to provide resources for them to become artists, their own artists in residence programs. And that's exciting to me to try to figure out if there's a way to design not curricular materials, but sort of, videos and, maybe even, AI bots that are teaching artists that are trained to act like us so that classroom teachers can get some supports. So that's exciting. And I'm hopeful that will take us in a really cool direction.
Well, Erica, your enthusiasm is infectious. And I would guarantee you that there are teachers out there who have been your students who, if they were invited on a podcast to bring on a mentor, that you would be at the top of that list. I guarantee it. And so it's been a real pleasure to talk to you. I'm glad we can spread the word about your podcast and the great work you're doing. And I really appreciate your time today.
Thanks, Bill. It's been really a great conversation.
Take care. I love Erica's idea of featuring people who've been successful in other fields, like Justice Jackson, reflecting on how the arts influenced this success. And if you didn't know that Condoleezza Rice played piano, give that a quick Google if you'd like to see her in action. And as I've said before, our actions have consequences. And in the case of being good and helpful to others, the ripple effects can be significant. And clearly, Erica Halverson's work is going to spread far and wide, both through her writing and podcasting, but also her teaching and encouragement of aspiring educators who will shape the lives of young people in or entering our education system. I hope you enjoyed this Blue Sky conversation with Erica Halverson. Before you go, please leave us a rating and review. These help us make a better show and have a big impact on influencing new listeners to check us out. And follow the Optimism Institute on social media to learn more about the work we're doing, as well as information about upcoming episodes. This episode of Blue Sky was edited and mixed by the amazing team at Sound On, Sound Off. To learn more about their work, visit soundonsoundoff.com. And all graphics and cover art for Blue Sky and the Optimism Institute were produced by Crush Graphics. That's Crush with a K, and you can find them at crushgraphics.com. Until next time, I'm the founder of the Optimism Institute and host of Blue Sky, Bill Burke, and I thank you for listening.